Computer.
Okay. It says now started recording.
Oh. Well,
Okay.
we did it.
It's happening. Sarah, you
Ah.
keep laughing too much. It's okay. It's a good thing. Don't or crap. Now she's gonna laugh the whole time. Anyway, um introductions. Hello, humans. Welcome to um fuck, what are we calling this? Black
Isn't
and
this called like base? Black and BAAS? Boss?
Boss.
Yeah,
I don't know.
base.
Do you want to call it base?
Base.
Well, that's what's up there.
Okay, I'll call it base.
Black and yeah, that's what it stands for.
Oh, we can be fancy.
That's not right. That's boss.
We can call ourselves base, but with like the hidden Z in it. I don't know. Is that edgy?
Or base is key.
Okay, so welcome to Boss's Black and Asian Solidarity Zoom series. We're gonna start with introductions, and then we're gonna get into the whys, and maybe we can do some community agreements. Anyways, I'm Tajane. I'm Tajane Stalker. I'm a senior at Wichita State University. I live in Wichita, Kansas. My major is ethnic studies with a minor in communication with a certificate in diversity and stratcom. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. I think that's very important.
Hi, my name is Allie. I go by the pronouns of she, her, hers. I got my bachelor degree in psychology with a minor in nonprofit, and then I went to get my master's degree in educational studies, and I did them both at the University of Oklahoma.
I think it's OU. Is it OU or UO? It's OU, right?
It's OU. Yeah, people get confused. They say Oklahoma University, but it's the University of Oklahoma.
Just like KU, but we'll get into that never. So.
Well, I'm Sarah. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm doing a double major or a combination of sociology and art at WSU. And yeah, go Sharks. Deep, it's your turn.
Yeah, Deep.
Ew, I don't like intros. Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Deep. I don't know why I'm thinking about where I went for school. Oh, okay. So I went to Lawrence University. It's in central Wisconsin. Nobody's heard of it. I don't blame you. I majored in biomedical ethics, which is basically like biology and sociology. We didn't have a sociology major, so I try to make up a major that's closest to it. That's what it entails. And pronouns are they, them, theirs, or he, him, his, or anything with respect. I started master's in public health, taking a break from it. Will return soon, and I'm also pre-med. And yeah, I think that's everything. Yeah.
Do you have any pronouns or anything you prefer to go by, or did you already say that?
I already said that, but any pronoun with respect, I don't mind.
Oh, I did not hear you say that. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. You're good.
So basically, I guess we can start with the history of why we are all in these little boxes during this pandemic. One day, one day, Deep has a really cool habit of putting me in these Facebook groups, which I really, really appreciate. And what he does. And one day he randomly put me in one that was called Black and Asian Solidarity. And I was like, that's pretty cool. So I went in there, and obviously there's like Black and Asian people in the group. And they were already having this conversation, which was something that was new to me because where I'm from Wichita, Kansas, and there's a lot of talk of Black and brown solidarity. Like we have murals of all over downtown, paintings, like it's just a thing. It's just a natural thing that happens. But not once have I ever heard or even thought of, and that's my own probably privilege. I never really thought of Black and Asian solidarity. I didn't even know it was a thing. I didn't know it was a concept. I didn't know there was a community. And so while I was in there and everyone was sharing stories or sharing posts, I was like, wow, like this is an actual thing. Why aren't we having that conversation? Or why doesn't that conversation exist? Or what barriers or boundaries are stopping us from having this conversation? So I messaged Deep with this idea. I was like, hey, can we start a Zoom or start a conversation, get the ball rolling about Black and Asian solidarity? Like, why is it not a thing? Or is it a thing where you live and it's just not a thing where I live? And so I messaged Deep, and the first three people I thought of were Deep, Sarah, and Allie. I know Deep and Allie from my fellowship, Young People For, and then I know Sarah because we both attend Wichita State. And these are probably like the most progressive people that I know, the like coolest people that I know, you know? And so it just made sense to have this conversation with people that I'm comfortable with and people who are not afraid to like talk about the struggles and the vulnerable stuff in their own communities as well as me. So it was an idea that I have, but now this is our idea. This is our conversation, and we're all here to kind of expand this conversation beyond this Zoom. So if people from Wichita, Kansas are watching this, whenever we touch back and, you know, leave our houses, this is something that should continue, something that we should do. But right now it's just a conversation about, you know, who, what, where, when, and why.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Beautiful.
That was really good. Yeah, and I think I really appreciate it because, you know, often, and like with this pandemic, like I think we see that there's a lot of like Asian Americans do face racism, but often it's not made visible. And I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, like our social media or our media in general. You know, there's a lot of coverage with COVID-19, but there's not a lot of coverage that, you know, Asian Americans are being discriminated and, you know, violence are happening, you know, against the community. And I think that's like part of, you know, why we wanted to do this, is to kind of bring awareness. I mean, I didn't get introduced to this field until like my senior year of college, and I go to OU, so there's not, from my perspective and my experience, there's not a lot of solidarity work among our communities of color. And so I think this is like a really good way to have, you know, the movement start and get people to talk, because sometimes people, I think that for me, like I was very uneducated, and I feel like I still am. So from my perspective, you know, I think this is a really good space for us to talk about, and if anybody else who wants to join, it's like a safe space during what we're going through.
We want to do community, not guidelines. What are they called?
Community agreements.
There we go.
Agreements.
So community agreements, Brave Space Guidelines, I like that name too. Community agreements, if you go to Wichita State, community agreements are like what Daniel Johnson does before every conversation. And so the list of do's and do nots, what happens during this conversation, the name just always changes. In YP4, they're called community agreements. I think in the ODI, they're called like rules of conversation or something like that. I don't know. But basically, even though this isn't live and you guys can't tell us what you would like to see, this is just for us as we discuss this conversation. So for me, a community agreement would basically be like take space, make space. That's something that I learned during YP4 and something that I really like. And so me specifically, I'm someone that talks a lot. Like if you know me, then I talk a lot and I always have something to say. And so in these conversations, I always reflect like, am I making space for the other people in the group? Being self-aware of how much space I'm taking in the group and leaving room for others to be more vulnerable or for others to make a comment. And then on the flip side, take space. So if you're someone that's more introverted, someone that's more quiet, or doesn't take up a lot of space. It's kind of like a self-reflection of like, why am I not adding anything in this group? Can I add anything to this group? I think everybody should at least once add something to this conversation. Don't let me run it. But that's something that I really like. If anyone else has something.
Yeah,
I
so
no,
go ahead. Sarah, go ahead.
I
No.
have the whole time. I already know. I personally like Land the Plane. So it's great. It's valid if you want to like vent or, like kind of go off. It's cool. But just like recognize, kind of like take space, make space, that try to land the plane in like regards to like make your point, kind of, and like recognize how much space you're taking up or how much space you aren't taking up. So I think that's like kind of about the same, but just try to make this conversation productive.
Mm-hmm. So is there anything specifically that we want to achieve by the end of this first, I want to call it webinar? I don't know.
Ooh, fancy. Put this on your resume.
Because Tajane, you kind of mentioned about talking about the history of a little bit on Black history as well as Asian American history. Is there a specific, like, I don't know, like where we want to go or start?
Like for today, or like the in
Yeah.
overall? Oh, for today. Today,
Mm-hmm.
I think today could be history. I remember when we first Zoomed together, we talked about like our struggle. Like I think, I remember talking about why it's so easy to have Black and Brown solidarity, and that's because our struggles are so visible. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody know, even if you don't know a whole lot, you know about the civil rights movement, you know how public the movement or how public our struggles have been as a community. And the same with the Hispanic community, you know how public everything they've been going through. And so it's so easy to bridge Black and Brown people just because of the media and history itself. And I brought up the point how like some Asian Americans have to prove that they go through discrimination. They have to prove not only that they are a person of color, but they also get discriminated against and they also have struggles. And so it's not public, it's out there, but no one talks about the history and the struggle of Asian Americans. And so I thought it'd be nice, at least for this first Zoom, to talk about, like I can talk about Black struggles. We know a majority of them. And so this is a good time to kind of unpack the struggles of Asian Americans. Like they've had their own civil rights movement. They have countless instances where they had to fight for their own rights, but it's just not talked about. It's just not publicized enough. And so we can start this for first Zoom talking, if we know, like I don't expect us all to be experts, but talking about at least what we know from our own community, our own struggles, and even intersectional, like the struggle of LGBTQIA in the Asian community. We can talk about that as well. And so talk about what you know, talk about what resonates with you, but I really don't expect us all to have PhDs in this, because
that could be another community agreement, is that we're all learning, and
that's a good one.
Yeah, it is okay to quote unquote make mistakes in this space. We're all learning and it's all part of the process. Like, if you asked me 3 years ago, I would not
nothing
this kind of conversation. So
yeah.
I think I ask the people who are watching this or who are involved in this to give us grace, because like I said, we're not experts. I'm still working on my degree. Sarah's still working on their degree. And so we will mess up, or we probably won't know things. And so give us grace about this conversation. We're already opening up and being vulnerable about our stories, even stories within our communities, and then posting it on the web. And so If you do have something to say, you can definitely say it. You can say whatever you want after this, but understand and give us grace that this is the first conversation that at least any of us has had about Black and Asian solidarity. So this is going to be a new learning process because I've never even had this conversation within the Asian community. And so this is new to me, just like anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely new to me also. You know, I mentioned I did my master in education studies and / education policy. And so at my own institution, it was quite hard to find, you know, like one classes that talks about Asian Americans, specifically like, you know, social justice issues and the history, to finding faculty and staff on my campus to like find representation. So when I was doing my master thesis over my own experience as a Southeast Asian American, and I identify as Vietnamese, it was super difficult to find anybody that could be on my we have it, what do we call, like committee, because at the end of my master I have to defend and present. So I have faculty committee members who, you know, were with me the whole year when I was working on my thesis, and it was really difficult to find guidance at my institution from a person who looked like me. And so, you know, like for me, I wanted to focus on the story of how I came to America, because often what I felt was that when people think of Asian Americans, obviously they think of, you know, my appearance or perhaps Sarah's appearance. They don't see that, you know, being Asian or what's being categorized as Asian is more than just one East Asian. It's Southeast Asian, it's South Asians. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to specifically do a thesis over my story. And a lot of it, I did a lot of historical analysis about, you know, what happened with the Vietnam War, because my grandfather came over here because of the Vietnam War. So there's a different history in terms of, you know, like how Asian Americans came to America before. It was a lot of East Asian, and it was very selective, right? So a lot of them were mainly, you know, professionals, or it was very exclusive until the wave of Southeast Asian Americans, which include Vietnamese, Hmong, Cambodians, came because of the Vietnam War. And so we didn't have a lot of that economic wealth. So a lot of it, you know, were people of like, how do I say this, like, it was just a different wave, uneducated. We were like, I don't want to say we because that's not very, you know, it doesn't include a lot of people. But that wave with the Vietnam War, I've seen, like, when we came over here, there's just, you know, the lack of resources is because part of it is that we are being categorized or seen as the model minorities, so that really mask a lot of our needs and struggles. And one of them is the language barrier. You know, one of the examples, you know, during this pandemic, applying for unemployment. A lot of my mom's friends, you know, they were telling her it's a lot easier to apply unemployment in Texas, but you can't do it in Texas if you're living in Oklahoma. So the process is so difficult here. So often I think about, you know, like accessibility in terms of language. So it's not very accessible, and a lot of people, I think, don't see that. And so again, it's part of going under the model minority, which was coined back in the 1960s, during the World War II, starting with Japanese Americans. So that history, again, if you know, even in school, like a lot of the narratives are missing. And so I think that's also part of the reason why I dedicated my thesis in, speaking my personal story, because I wanted to make sure that whoever, future generation, whoever is coming up, at least there's some data. Because here in Oklahoma, there's not a lot of data on the experiences of Asian Americans just in general. And then if you get even more specific, like, to specific ethnicity, like Vietnamese, like there's not one at all. So that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to dedicate my thesis focusing on the community.
I was muted, my bad, but I said, wow. There's a lot of stuff that I didn't know, and I think a lot of throughout this whole type webinar thing, we're going to be using a lot of our personal stories, because that's just how, that's the best experience we have. And I think one, I want to thank you for opening up, and you didn't have to share all that. And then I want to thank you for explaining not only how your family came here, also like words that we didn't know and terms that we're going to be using throughout this whole series. Sarah, do you have anything to add? That was really deep, and I really appreciate that.
I'm feeling good. I'm ready to get into it.
So Allie gave us it was in-depth history of the Asian American struggle. I think it'd be interesting to talk about things that we can relate to, especially when it comes to like social and political movements. And so we know of the civil rights movement. We know about Stonewall, which was led by a Black trans woman, and there's a lot of intersectionalities when it comes to the LGBTQIA and the Black movement. And so what I think I want to know, or a good conversation that we could have, is, and this can relate to a story too, is there a specific moment in Asian American history that kind of led you to be progressive? For me, it was definitely the civil rights movement. It was definitely the fight to vote, because we all know that white suffragettes were now fighting for people who look like me or people who look like my mom. And so that's something that kind of sparked my movement in this, and plus the lack of representation currently now. And so those are small things that led me to be political now. Is there anything that moves you to want to build in your community? And I think I have a follow-up, I'm going to type it, but was there a specific moment or something that you learned in your Asian American history that was like, wow, like, I think it's time for me to start doing something or being active in my community?
Ooh, I feel like I have to think about this one. To be honest, I feel like I honestly did not really like take on the label of Asian American until coming to college, which is weird, I guess. Because I went to a private school that was like all predominantly white, like upper middle class. So I always just saw myself as like a Japanese person. Like I didn't really see myself as like an Asian American. And apparently, like, I'm not 100% like knowledgeable about this history, but like in the US, like there wasn't really the term Asian American until like pretty later on, when I think it was like a Chinese person got confused with a Japanese person, or vice versa. I'm not sure. But his name was like Vincent Chen. Oh my God, Chinese. And he was like murdered because he was assumed to be Japanese, I believe. Oh my God, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know enough of this. But then that sparked a realization that like in the US, we're viewed just like as Asian Americans. We're not viewed as like you're Chinese, you're Japanese, like, you know, as at least like for East Asians specifically. So like that coined the term like Asian American. And before that, it was like that term didn't exist. So I don't know. I never really connected my struggle or like my history to Asian American experiences until coming to college, because I honestly did not know like a lot about any of the other struggles that like South Asians face or Southeast Asians face. Like I had no idea. I honestly did not know about the Vietnam War. I didn't know about a lot of these things. And it wasn't until like came to the college and I was like, oh my God, it's there's so many like stories, and it's impossible to like merge it all under this term Asian American, because oh my God, like South Asian, Southeast Asian, East Asian, it's so different. And like, so I think it's important to recognize that, and I'm still trying to recognize that, because I think it's easy for me, I'm like acting out of my own privilege, like I think it's easy for me to just default into like assuming that everything that's Asian American is Pan Asian or East Asian, which isn't fair, because like that's discounting a lot of like Southeast Asian and South Asian like stories. So yeah, I think there's definitely like, wow, I have to coming back to this question. I think coming to college, I realized that like there's also an importance on a collective identity, even though there is like pros and cons to that. It also builds solidarity in general. So yes, there's mixed feelings, but overall, yes, I realized that is good.
I think for me, my undergraduate years, I was very involved with the Latinx community. So I got involved with Latinos Without Borders for like 2.5. I was part of it for 2.5 years, and I guess like I think right around my senior year was when that was when I kind of started questioning, like I see, like one, I was feeling guilty for the fact that, oh, like why, I'm so involved in a different community, but why am I not involved in my own community? And I understand that I have a negative bias against my own community based on my personal experiences, and it took me quite a bit of time to recognize and call it as it is of how I'm feeling. But it was because of those experiences of seeing, why aren't questioning, like why isn't my community here in Oklahoma, like why aren't we talking about social justice issues? Why aren't we talking about the fact that other people, other communities aren't having these resources in school? And a lot of it was based on my personal experience, because I went to Oklahoma City Public School, where historically it has been a place for like deep segregation, and it's still happening right now. And so a lot of my experiences, when I was going to church, there were, it's kind of like I felt ashamed that I was coming from or going to school in areas where I was associated with Black people or Black students, Latino students. And so there was that shame that I had for a long time, but it was not my fault. So it took me quite a bit of time to understand that these were systemic issues, and it wasn't from me. But being, kind of shunned for the fact that I went to these schools really took part in shaping like my identity. And so that's made me question a lot more about, like, why aren't we, my community here in Oklahoma, why aren't we like thinking about these things? Why are we shaming other people who don't have that resources, where these circumstances are out of their control? So that got me into, like being involved more in my curiosity in Asian American history. And of course, I can't do this without mentioning Angie Tran, which we all know who she is. And she was, at that time, there were a lot of things that she was trying to explain to me that I simply did not understand. I was in that mindset of, well, like, I mean, my parents were able to pick themselves up, and so did I, so why can't other people? So I did have that mindset. And it wasn't until like I was able to really self-reflect and see that, okay, one, I have a negative bias with my own community, and then started just going from there, like why, and just and then went to my first, Southeast Asian American conference. It was called CIRAC. So I think, what was it called? Like Southeast Asian American Resource something, like 2 years ago. And I went with Angie. And so being able to see people who look like me, people who had similar backgrounds and similar struggles, that really prompted me to be like, oh, like these struggles, that perhaps what I'm feeling and experience are real, because other people in my community are experiencing this. But it was kind of sad that it took me having to go outside of, my community, out of Oklahoma, to see and connect with these individuals. So that's how I kind of started in my field and where I'm at right now. Mm-hmm.
I definitely think that like whole internalized negative like bias against like, the Asian American community, I feel like it's so common, and like I feel that too, especially because like for the longest time, like when I started like interacting more with like Asian American friends and stuff, like I felt like for some reason it was like so much internalized shame, and I was like, I don't know if I want to associate with this community, which is like super weird. Like that doesn't make any sense. And also like that was mixed in with like understanding that like some parts of the community are kind of problematic and like anti-Black, and it's a little difficult to like push back against. So it's kind of like try to work through that. Like I'm trying to be proud of my community, but also like call them in and be like, hey,
Yeah,
this is not right. Like, so
yeah.
it's kind of that weird, I'm at that weird place right now.
Yeah, and that's okay. Like I still struggle to, whenever I'm thinking about, well, I want to be proud of my community, and I am proud of my culture. I'm super proud of where I come from and my culture and everything. But when it comes to to me, there are practices and beliefs that are problematic. Like you mentioned, like anti-Blackness. That's a systemic problem. It's a global concept that, even with my own parents, like, making little comments like, oh, well, Allie, you shouldn't be going out to run, with the sun outside. You're going to get really dark, and that's not attractive. So those little things. And I think like it's also like I said, like I felt guilty whenever I have that negative bias against my own community. But, our feelings and what feelings are valid is that's what I've learned. And there's a reason why we feel that way if we do have that negative bias. Because, as a middle school, I remember like being in middle school, it's not fun when, your friend at church come up to you and ask you like, hey, where do you go for school? And you say, well, I go to this school. And then having them to say, well, isn't that like a bad school? So I still, just because, there's Black students and Latino students, and the fact that there's a lack of funding. So those experiences, made of who we are now. And I think unless that we, and I think there's part of like when I try to admit those or call out what it is, there's part of like being able to have that or experience humility. How do you say? And that's something I think, specifically like in Asian, in my own community, I think we have a very hard time because I feel like whenever I step out of the house, there's this big reputation that I have to uphold, because if I have a bad reputation, it's just not going to just be reflective of me. It's going to be reflective of my parents and my family. And that is so ingrained in me with whenever like, my parents say things like, oh, I hope you're not going to protest with those people on TV because it's, bad. It doesn't look well. So on our family or anything like that. So just little things like that. So I think our experience are valid, and having conversation like this really helped. Like I said, like I didn't recognize that, oh, these were like real issues that Asian American experience until I went to that conference, and then I saw this like all these wholesome people talking about it. So that's yeah.
That was all very deep. Like I didn't know that you like I don't assume people have biases against their own community. And so I don't want to say it's weird to hear that, because it's not, because when I was younger I had biases against my own community, but I just you don't guess, at least for me, the from the outside as a Black person, the Asian community always looks so knit, like they always looked so together, and that's something that I was like, oh, like I wish the Black community is pretty good at it. Like we've all had similar experiences, and so like we still have like a very huge problem with homophobia in the community, so it's kind of hard. But to me, when I look at the Asian community, it's like, oh, they all have it together, like they're very like close. And that's something that I want the Black community to look like. And so for you both to say like, yeah, I had biases against my own community, I'm like, well, it definitely doesn't look like that. So I don't know. I think it's very interesting. It's something that I really never would have guessed.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, I mean, and when I was studying again, like with my thesis, the fact that part of the history, so like for instance, and it was kind of surprising to me too. So there was an incident where, and again, like if we trace it back to like white supremacy, there were Korean and Japanese. So what I read was that there was, with all the discrimination and racism that was happening during like around the 1900s, where like there were a lot of xenophobia, and you had that Chinese Exclusion Act. Our own communities within the Asian Americans started saying, like, for instance, like, well, if the Japanese Americans would just clean themselves up, and this is coming from Koreans, then they wouldn't be confronting so much racism or discrimination, right? So there was that history is already there, where for me, like my own community is already pitting against each other. And there's a lot of other things as well. Like, for instance, China and Vietnam, we're not on good terms. And it's been like for a very long time. So it can get very political. I mean, on the front, you see us as a model minority, which is assuming the fact that every Asian Americans are successful, wealthy, smart, all of that. But there's this like transnational conflict that people don't see, and it's very hard. Like, for instance, last summer, there was a conflict where China investors wanted to rent land from Vietnam, and if this bill has passed in Vietnam, Chinese investor would have been able to like rent for like 99 years. Like, that's, and there was a protest that was going on there for like at least, it started in June, but people were protesting. And then like there were signs that were, Chinese people, because there are some ethnic Chinese in Vietnam. They put signs up like, no Vietnamese are welcome here in this restaurant, and vice versa, right? Vietnamese restaurants are like, well, no Chinese are welcome. And there were violence, especially in the north. And so with that, like, there's that conflict within our community. And so there's different layers that are happening, and often is that we don't talk about it. And so it goes, it just kind of goes underneath the rug, and people just kind of see us like as collectively like getting along with each other. But there's just different issues, and sometimes it's just very complex to dive into. And yeah.
And I think that gets like passed down to like, especially with like first generation immigrants, like where they're coming to the US for the first time. A lot of that's like ingrained in their culture from like the original country. So it's like, because I hear my parents all the time, they're like, they don't like Chinese people at all. And yeah, like it's like, it doesn't even matter like their character or like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just weird. And like a lot of times like just people in like Wichita too, like, and we're all immigrants here, so like a lot of us aren't even like 100% like connected to like our very like native land, because we're not living there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they still have like these biases against Chinese people, and I'm like so confused. So like that also adds to like the internalized like bias, like where you're like, damn, I really don't really feel connected to this community.
Mm-hmm.
It's so weird. And it's also like you get both like the US perspective on things and also like your native land's perspective on things. Like
Mm-hmm.
I always felt like I had a grain of salt against like the Japanese like culture like being so like sexist and like homophobic and transphobic and xenophobic, and because I learned that from US like culture, but then I also heard from like Japanese culture that like the US is bad and stuff. So it's just kind of like, I don't know, like everything's like kind of confusing. Like growing up, I was like, whose opinion do I trust? Like, so it was just weird. So yeah, that all adds up to like, how am I supposed to feel about this community? Like, we're supposed to be bonding over like these shared values, which makes sense, and shared history. But it's also like when it comes to our like native lands, like
Mm-hmm.
who knows what's going on?
Yeah.
Wow. I learned so much. Wow. So I'm glad this was the first episode, because my biggest question was like, then this can be solved at the end of this webinar whenever we're done, like the complete webinar, but like, how do we create Black and Asian, I almost said Black and Brown, how do we create Black and Asian solidarity And I think the first part, at least for me, is like unpacking everything. Because from the outside, I'm like, okay, well, your community is pretty close and my community is pretty close. So like it should be pretty easy, but it doesn't seem like it's easy if the community already has biases against each other. And so, I mean, I don't think we're going to solve the rift between the Black and Asian community, but at least with this conversation, we can get the conversation started within these sub communities, because we can't really solve anything if we don't acknowledge the history and what's already happening. Because not once did I know that people were in the community were already discriminating against each other. I never would have guessed. We kind of, and I guess in the Black community we have that, but that's like Black versus Africans, like people who are actually from the continent of Africa. That's something that we have issues on. I'm not sure why. Well, I guess I do know why. One part is actually removed, so far removed. Like I'm so far removed from the continent of Africa. I have no idea where okay, I do because I paid to get the test done. But technically speaking, I have no idea where my family's from in Africa. And so it's hard for me to connect. And so if you ever notice, like especially at Wichita State, or at least for me, BSU doesn't really connect with any of like I don't know if we have a Nigerian Student Association, but when I went to Big 12 in OU, they had someone from the school had an issue, like their Nigerian Student Association just wouldn't really connect with the Black Student Association or Black Student Union, because they were so different. Technically speaking, they were so different. Like one was so far removed and the others are actually from their country. They know the food, they know the language. And so there's such a cultural difference. Like it's very different being born and raised in America and then immigrating, even though our skin colors are very similar. Like it's just so different. And so at the end of the day, they're going to treat us the same. And I do mean white supremacy. Like they're going to look at us the same. There is no difference between us. And so my biggest thing is like, there should be a better form of solidarity between our communities, because at the end of the day, white supremacy does not discriminate between, they don't care where we're from. Black is Black. And so I get why there is a rift between the communities in the Asian community. It's just something that like, I just never would have guessed. And that's my own biases, and that's my own, I guess, privilege, is just assuming. And model minority, obviously, model minority plays a big part in how we view Asian Americans and how Asian Americans view themselves as well. The model minorities for the next episode, if you want to continue watching. So I guess my big question is like, how do we start? Other than unpacking, like we have to unpack white supremacy, we have to unpack anti-Blackness, we have to unpack our personal biases in our own communities. But I mean, this conversation is a good start, but what does Black and Asian solidarity look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what it should look like. Is that, you know, like one being able to, you know when to take space and like know when to like give space. And the things that you were talking about, Tajani, like I think, you know, our shared experiences. So like when you were talking about, you know, like white supremacy will see you in general as Black, and it's, you know, it's gonna discriminate based on, and it's the same thing with Asian Americans. I often think about, you know, like one of the tactics of white supremacy is to erase narratives and cultures, right? So it's the same thing why I chose to specifically did my thesis over my narrative, is that I did not want my experience to be erased. And I think that's what we have in common as communities of colors, is that white supremacy purposely tries to erase our culture and our narratives. And you see it in school, right? So like when Sarah was talking, well, I never learned, you know, any of this until I got to college. You know, same for me, like we didn't learn any of this high school. Like I didn't know what model minority is. I didn't know these that Asian Americans were experiencing discrimination until college. And so I think identifying small pockets of similar lived experiences maybe the first step into Black and Asian solidarity, and that will take us sharing our stories and sharing what's happening with us, and building from that, even within our own like Asian American communities. Like, we don't talk about it. Deep one time talked about how, like, my parents, what they taught me was, when it comes to like mental health, you just work through it. You work through your mental health. You don't go seek for help. You don't. And so I think the more we talk about it, then it validates that these are real lived experiences, and it just validates our existence. Just kind of like Deep said, your existence is valid.
Thank you, Deep. We appreciate you.
Yes, we do.
I remember I was talking to some friends at Wichita State. I was talking to, shout out to David and Juan. I asked them, because we have the concept of Black and brown solidarity, but to me, and this is no shade, no tea to Wichita, but a mural will not solve your problems. I think the concept is beautiful, but we have to put actual work into our city to build these bonds. And we have a Black and brown mural not downtown, kind of downtown somewhere. And it's there, it exists, and I think it's beautiful, but if we don't put the work in, that mural is just a mural. It's just there. It's just an idea and a concept. And so I was talking to some friends and I was like, what does Black and brown solidarity look like? And we can translate this to what does Black and Asian solidarity look like? And it's not just it's not a one-time event, one-time conversation, and then we're done. I love this conversation, and I think we're breaking down barriers, but it's rooted, white supremacy is rooted so deeply. So that means our actions and everything that we do also has to be rooted deeply. This conversation or the one-time events that we do on our campus just removes like a weed. It will never unroot the systematic things that we go through. And I didn't tell him this, and that just came off the top of my head. So I'm really proud of me. So I told him that we have to have really uncomfortable conversations. I think a lot of times Black and brown solidarity is monetized. It's a trope in sitcoms. I'm watching On the Block right now. And don't get me wrong, On the Block is or On My Block is really, really good. And it's rooted in Black and brown solidarity, but it's more than a TV trope. It's right now, currently it's romanticized, it's monetized, but it's more, it has to be more than that. It's more than just a concept. And what we don't see when it's on TV or in the media, what we don't see are these uncomfortable topics. We don't see unpacking anti-Blackness. We don't see why homeboy in the Hispanic community can't say the N-word, but I can. We're not having these uncomfortable, ugly conversations. One, because media doesn't like ugly. It doesn't make money. Yeah. And so in order for us to achieve Black and brown solidarity, in order for us to achieve Black and Asian solidarity, we have to be uncomfortable. We have to have these ugly conversations. I don't expect us to have a falling out or get upset with each other, but I expect us to unpack our biases, and I expect us to just be uncomfortable, because that's how we progress. That's how we move on. We have to unroot white supremacy, and white supremacy is not pretty. Anti-Blackness is not pretty. And so I don't think we'll solve it here, but anybody who's watching, you can have the one event on your campus or in your community, but we need more than that. We need to be constantly showing up and showing out for our communities. And that's the whole community. And so a lot of times we have these movements, but we're not including Asian Americans. And why aren't we including them? Because we just assume that this isn't their problem. They don't go through what we go through. So why extend the hand? And I think we're not better, but we're pretty good at it at Wichita State. I think we have a good community, and like we kind of understand that people of color are people of color, but it's just we need to continuously show up and show out, whether that's a protest or a conversation. Like I don't know. To me, it has to be ugly. I think these conversations need to be ugly.
Yeah, and I think part of it too, you said about we have to show up and show out. I mean, part of it, I also think that personally, as when I identify as Asian Americans, it's also my responsibility to be intentional about showing up and caring and supporting, even if it doesn't affect me directly. And so I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think this is a good step. And I will probably have to leave soon. So
I get that. This doesn't have to be long. Our next one is probably going to be about model minority, and that's probably going to be long. So it's going to be long. But model minority is white
That could
supremacy.
be a whole series.
So basically, like that could be several episodes. So we can end it here and continue with model minority and all that good stuff, white supremacy. But I think we're off to a really good start. I think we should post this, but I hope these conversations continue in our own like backyards. It's kind of hard to like do work when we have to be at home, but at least these conversations will still exist. And it's definitely not the end. And so whenever we are free from house arrest, we can get the real work done. But that's all I gotta say. Dee, do you have anything to say? Wow.
Yes.
What?
No, that was it.
Oh. No.
Next episode, next webinar, Deep has to start. He needs to drop his knowledge.
He's just facilitating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Deep, at
Yeah.
least, okay, so how about you start and then you don't have to say anything again? Well, Deep is going to talk next episode. So
Yep, he is.
Nope.
He's gonna go. He's gonna be talking throughout the whole webinar.
Oh yeah, he's
Gonna
gonna
be his face.
and he's going to school everyone
What
on
if
white
they link it with
supremacy.
food? Model minority myth and association with food.
Deep would go off.
Hell no. I'm just gonna listen and be respectful.
Model
and just
minority is
listen.
like a cookie, and then
Oh,
Deep
God
will
damn it.
bake the cookie while
No.
explaining it.
No, don't ruin food for me. Don't ruin
All
food
right,
for
y'all.
me. All right.
This was
Peace
fun.
out.
Bye.
Bye.
We'll convene on Wednesday. Is that the
Yeah.
plan?
Yes.
Okay. So Wednesday. What was it?
Wait, stop recording.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, don't let them know.
All right. So let me just fix this.